Good evening, children. This is my third video on the chapter Kingdom Fungi. In the previous video, I have explained asexual reproduction in fungi by the formation of different types of spores, and we have discussed a total of 8 different types of spores or propagules, their characteristics, and the examples. In this video, I will explain the sexual reproduction in fungi. Now, sexual reproduction is seen in all fungi except the fungi imperfecti, which come under Deuteromycetes. The classification I'll be doing in my next video, but for just now, you can understand only in this group of fungi, sexual reproduction is not seen, and that is why they're called as imperfect fungi or fungi imperfecti. Now, there are some steps in sexual reproduction which we'll study. Total of 3 steps or 3 events. Number 1, it is plasmogamy. Second, karyogamy. And the third is meiosis. Remember, children, the term gamy means marriage. So here, plasmogamy, this involves the fusion of two protoplasts that are coming from two different cells. It brings two genetically different cells, two different nuclei in the same cell, and such a cell with two genetically different nuclei is called a dikaryotic or binucleate cell, right? And the phenomenon is called dikaryotization. Now you can see this. This briefly represents sexual reproduction. You can see there are two genetically different cells. If I name this as A and B, then you can see the two nuclei, they are brought together in a single cell, but they have not fused yet, right? So their nucleus, they are still separate but in the same periphery, and we call this phase as the dikaryotic phase or binucleate cell, right? Then the next stage of this is fusion. So the fusion of nucleus, which means karyogamy, this involves the fusion of two haploid nuclei which come together in plasmogamy. Remember, children, these haploid nuclei which have been brought together, right, are still separate. They have not fused yet, right? So in next step, karyogamy, the same haploid nuclei will be fusing to form a diploid structure, right? So they come together in plasmogamy, thus they fuse here to form a diploid nucleus. This is called as synkaryon. The diploid nucleus is called as synkaryon. Now remember, this gap between plasmogamy or the gamy or fusion of cytoplasm and the fusion of the nucleus does not take place in a very specific or fixed direction, right? Sometimes it so happens that there is a great variation in the duration between the two processes. In lower fungi, karyogamy or the fusion of nuclei follows plasmogamy almost immediately. That is, this process is occurring followed immediately by the formation of synkaryon. But in higher fungi like Puccinia, right, or the mushrooms, the karyogamy or this process is much delayed, and this occurs just before meiosis, right? We can say that the further fusion will be much delayed, and in mushroom etc the nuclei are held like this, right? The cells in the intervening stage between these two stages of plasmogamy and karyogamy contain two nuclei, right, like this, and such cells are called dikaryotic cells, and the phase is called as dikaryotic phase. So I hope you've understood, children. Once again, plasmogamy, the first step in sexual reproduction, I've explained how the two different cells, they're coming, bringing two genetically different nuclei in the same cell, but they have not fused yet. So such a phase was called as dikaryotic or the binucleate, or means two nuclei, they are there. The next step is karyogamy or the fusion of two haploid nuclei, that is still this is N, and they will fuse into 2N or a diploid synkaryon. But then I told you the variation of time, right? Lower fungi, this happens almost immediately. That is plasmogamy followed by karyogamy. But in higher fungi, this is much delayed. So the cell remains in a state of dikaryotic phase. That means they contain two nuclei in the intervening stage. And this phase is called as the dikaryotic phase. The third and the last step in sexual reproduction is meiosis, which results in the reduction of chromosomes in nucleus to half. You remember, children, we call it as the reduction division, and this helps in recombination of genetic material. The products of meiosis are dispersed in the form of secondary formed spores called as meiospores. So this I have already explained in the previous video how meiospores are different from mitospores. So this was the step in sexual reproduction. Now let us study the types of sexual reproduction. Remember, this step was different. This is steps. That is how 3 steps are going to be explained in the sexual reproduction. Now you're going to study the types of sexual reproduction. There are broadly 5 types, right? The first type is called as planogametic copulation. Second is called as gametangial contact. Third is gametangial copulation. Fourth is permeation. And fifth is somatogamy. In your syllabus, under planogametic copulation, you have to study the definitions of isogamy, anisogamy, and oogamy only, right? So let us understand what is a planogamete. A motile gamete is called a planogamete. Motile means a gamete which can move, right, by various movements like swimming, etc. So what is planogametic copulation? This type of copulation involves fusion of two compatible gametes, right? And this can be brought in 3 ways: isogamy, anisogamy, and oogamy. So let us complete one form before I generalize the others. These are not asked in detail, children, but only one line explanation I will give for all. So here, let us once again, planogamete, I told you it's a motile gamete. And here we are going to talk about the fusion in 3 forms. The first is what we call as isogamy. See, iso means same, right? And here you're talking about fusing gametes which are morphologically similar but physiologically different. See, these are two fusing gametes looking exactly like same externally, that is morphologically or structurally their form is similar, but internally, that is physiologically, when you talk of living properties or reactions inside, they are different. So fusion of this type of gametes, when they are morphologically similar but physiologically or internally different, is called isogamy. The second category is anisogamy. This means the fusing gametes are morphologically and physiologically different. Now you can see there's a lot of different externally as well, along with their internal differences. So these gametes are morphologically and physiologically different. The male gamete is active and small. You can see the male gamete is small and more active, whereas the female is large and less active. So such a fusion between the gametes which are morphologically and physiologically different is called as anisogamy. An means without. So there is no similarity whether there is a physical, that is morphologically or physiologically, right? The third type of fusion is oogamy. Here, the female gamete is non-motile. The egg is non-motile or it cannot move. And this is called as egg, right? The male is small, active and motile. So the male is small, active and it is motile, and we call this as sperm. So remember, children, there are 3 forms of sexual reproduction you are studying under planogametic copulation: isogamy, anisogamy, and oogamy. In your syllabus, you are only asked to explain in the form of definition. So isogamy was easy to explain, anisogamy is also very easy, and so is oogamy, children. You only have to remember how the sperm is small, active, and motile. That means capable of movement, whereas egg is non-motile, right? and it is here as a female gamete, that is here. So this is the fusion under planogametic copulation. In your book, this is given at textbook page number 2.46. Here, this has been explained like this, right? Let us talk about the other forms. Just now I told you there are 5 forms of sexual reproduction or types of sexual reproduction. Gametangial contact. Let us see how this second goes. Gametangial contact is something like this. What can you explain here? There are 2 types of sex organs, right? The male sex organ is called antheridium and the female sex organ is called as oogonium, right? The nucleus is transferred from the male gamete to the female gamete by a fertilization tube that is formed in between. So that's all about gametangial contact. Gametangia means sex organs, male antheridium, female oogonium, and the fusion takes place by a fertilization tube. The third is the type of sexual reproduction is gametangial copulation. See, this is much different from the previous. This was gametangial contact, only they were in contact. But here they are fusing. The gametangial copulation, the entire protoplasm you can see of the gamete, that is the entire protoplasm of 2 dissimilar gametangia, they are fused to form a zygospore. So this thick walled structure, this is called a zygospore. We can see this in mucor and rhizopus. The fourth type is what we call as spermatization. Here, a small male cell or gamete is carried to the hypha of the female gametangium. So this you can see, a very small male cell is carried from the hypha carried to the hypha of the female cell, or this is what we call as the receptive hypha. And the last is somatogamy. This involves the fusion of 2 vegetative cells. Now these are normal hypha, children. 2 vegetative cells, they fuse belonging to the same thallus or the plant body, right? And this can be seen in yeast or sometimes in mushroom, that is agaricus, right? So this is something very simple. Once again, children, 5 forms of sexual reproduction. Planogametic copulation. Your syllabus only asks you the definition of 3 forms: isogamy, anisogamy, and oogamy. But you must know how one form is different from the other. Not in detail, children, but here I have just told you how gametangial contact is different from gametangial copulation. Then spermatization, how the male gamete is just brought from the male cell or the gamete to the receptive or female hypha or gametangium, and here 2 vegetative hypha, they are fusing, and this is brought by somatogamy, or the gamy or marriage of the somatic hypha, right? So this is all about the sexual reproduction types. So in this video, I have explained the sexual reproduction, the steps by 3 methods: plasmogamy, karyogamy, meiosis, and the intervening phase when the karyogamy is delayed, then the cell remains in a dikaryotic phase, or the phase where the nuclei, they are not fused, they are still like this. All right. And then I have discussed the types of sexual reproduction, especially these 3 types: isogamy, anisogamy, and oogamy. So that's all for this video, children. In my next video, I will explain you the definitions of the terms that are mentioned. Thank you.